Welcome to your reading. I'm going to start with Pluto, as always, which is the foundation of the life, of the birth chart. It's the soul's desire, what keeps us incarnating. You have Pluto in your 6th house here. Sorry, I'm drawing this with a mouth, so it's kind of shaky. Pluto in the 6th is the archetype of Virgo. The desire is crisis, that leads to self-analyzation, which leads to the polarity of Pisces, which is connection to Source, connection to God, an understanding of what life all is about and what's important in life. So that's the unconscious desire, that's your soul's desire. And you've been utilizing this desire for multiple lifetimes now to incarnate. If we look at the distance between your Pluto and Mars, so Pluto and Mars, we can see that you've gone about more than halfway through the lifetimes that you will go through utilizing this specific desire for the purposes of incarnation. So I always like to look at this because it tells me how much experience any particular soul has with the desire that they're currently working with. So this is something that your soul has quite a bit of experience with, this, repeated lifetimes of Virgo and the crisis and the self-analysis and how that leads you towards Source, towards God, towards understanding the true meaning of life. Okay, and the next part of the evolutionary axis is the nodes. So you have the South Node here in the sign of Virgo in the 6th house, and the North Node in Pisces in the 12th. So this is basically mirroring the energy of your soul. So that means that the energy of your soul and your ego are compatible. Therefore, you might be more conscious of some of these underlying forces that are driving your life, whereas somebody who had different energies, they might not be as conscious of that. So when your nodes and your Pluto are in the same signs and houses, it's basically your ego, your self-identity is a mirror to the true unconscious desires of your soul. And that means that the journey is going to be the same. So this evolution in your sense of who you are and your ego and your self-identity over the course of your life is taking you from this Virgo past to this Pisces present, or sorry, from this Virgo past to a Pisces present and future. And Jeffrey Wolfgrain, the father of EA, taught that the moon is the integrator between its nodes. The South Node is the identity we bring forward from past lives, and then our current moon is how we are making this process happen here from the South to the North Node, how we are how we are integrating our old and new self-identity, our new and old ego, moment to moment, on a day-to-day basis. And you have the moon in water, Cancer, in the 4th house. So that tells me that this process of going from this Virgo person to this more Pisces person is happening through your emotional body. It's happening through your emotions. So when you are, you know, so as your self-identity and ego changes over the course of your life, you're experiencing that through your emotions. Let's talk about the rulers of the nodes now. Okay, you have South Node in Virgo. The ruler is Mercury, which is here. There's a couple of things particular to your chart that I want to talk about with the South Node ruler being Mercury. The first thing is that the rulers of the nodes are how we're actualizing our self-identity, kind of like with the moon here is how we're integrating, who we were and who we are into who we will become. That's the job of the moon. The job of the rulers of the nodes are how we are going about these two specific identities, our past and present identity and our present and future identity, which are the south node of the moon and the north node of the moon. So in your past, when you were younger, in your past life, the way that you were actualizing or the way that you were actualizing this Virgo identity was through some type of Geminian or Gemini thing, such as the intellect. I know that you mentioned reading as a hobby, and I imagine that you've read a lot of astrology and self-help books and those type of things. So that's one thing that this ruler could represent. In your past life, you could have been somebody who had a really high IQ because you like to read. You're somebody who's thirsty for knowledge, which relates really well to the archetype of Gemini. It could also relate to some type of communication. I know that when I spoke with you that, English isn't your first language, I believe, and then you talked about learning some other languages. So this gift of learning different languages could also be what this Mercury represents. That could have been something that you did in your past life. And, the reason for that may have been that you were able to talk to people who have, different ideas than you about certain things, or people who can help you in your self-analyzation efforts. You mentioned your best friend being a psychologist, I think you said, or a counselor. And you found me and we set this reading up. So this ability to talk to people from all over the world through understanding and knowing different languages, that could also be related to this Mercury here. But so those are some possible ways that you would have been actualizing that Virgo identity. You have to sometimes to be self-analytical. It helps, to have knowledge that you would get from reading, that you would get from books, or to do self-analysis. It helps to be able to understand people who maybe their first language is different to yours, but they have the information that you need that's going to help you to self-analyze. Mercury is special in your chart because it is conjunct your north node here, and that has a specific meaning. So I'm going to go ahead and switch over to my notes for that. So any planets conjunct the north node, which you have Mercury, represent a quality developed in recent prior lives that is useful in furthering your evolutionary intention. So it's something, some mercurial thing, you know, the reading, the learning languages, whatever resonates for you, that you've developed in your past lives to help you to attain your north node, to help you to evolve, to become this Pisces individual that's represented by your north node sign and house. Now, Mercury is your south node ruler, and it's conjunct the north node, so this applies here too. When the south node ruler is conjunct the north node, repetition of prior life karma early in life can be something that you experience. And it's symbolic of being necessary to kickstart the evolution of the self or ego into those north node energies. It also is indicative of the need to relive explicit events or themes symbolized by the planet ruling the south node in order for the self to evolve. So any type of themes that go along with Gemini, and I already gave, you know, from our conversation what I suspect that those themes might be. Okay, we're gonna go back to your chart here. So that's the south node ruler, which is really important in your chart. And then your north node is in Pisces, so the ruler is Neptune. And this north node ruler is how you're going to be, you know, practically and physically actualizing your north node identity. So with your Neptune being in the 8th house, you know, this is the 8th house deals with psychology, with, you know, going deep and merging with another. And with it being in the sign of Sagittarius, you know, you're merging deep, you're going deep. Into these different types of belief systems. That's what, you know, one thing that Sagittarius represents. So that is how you are becoming more Piscean, you know, more Pisces over the course of your lifetime, is in that way. Going deep into the psychology of specific beliefs. And I think, you know, this combo here, this combination, Sagittarius, Scorpio, to me, that's very evolutionary astrology. You know, the 8th house is the house of Pluto, and astrology is ruled by Sagittarius. So I'm not surprised that you've gotten into EA as a way to try to make sense of your life and, you know, try to accomplish the things that you want to accomplish for your soul in this lifetime. Okay, so that's kind of an overview of your evolutionary axis, and I want to go deeper into your nodes, I guess your whole axis, and your Chiron, because you just finished your Chiron return. So that's going to be really relevant for you at this time. Okay, this is a theory that I'm still working out. So if this doesn't resonate with you, in this whole reading, just take what resonates with you and leave the rest. And I have the sense that, you're an intuitive person and you're also an intelligent person. So you'll be able to use both your intuition and your mind to know, what's correct for you in this reading, what's helpful and what's not. So my theory with Chiron is that it is connected, just like everything in your chart is connected. We talked a little bit about this during our call. My theory is that Chiron is that, that wound, the wound and the scars that we all carry from that wound is the manifestation of the shadow energies of our south node. So, when we're in our south node and we are on the lower vibrational side of whatever energy is in our south node, for you it's Virgo, so the shadow aspects of Virgo, and those manifest for everybody. The shadow aspects of their nodes, of their ego, of their self-identity, manifest when they resist growth, when they resist evolution, when they resist the polar opposite energy. They resist becoming someone new, which is represented by their north node. It's the ego has a need to feel safe and secure through remaining the same, even if not changing is harmful to the self, because the ego's biggest need is for survival and security, which conflicts with the soul's need to grow and evolve. Anyways, getting back to this theory, so the Chiron moon is the manifestation, or the effect, if you want to call it, of trying to meet the ego's need for security and stagnation, to stay the same, to not change, to not grow, to not evolve. And then Uranus comes in here. This is the trauma that our ego has experienced. So all these things are working in tandem with Pluto and, all the other aspects of our being, of course, Mercury, our intellect, Mars, our will, the more conscious expression of Pluto, our soul's desires. And I thought about this because you have Chiron in Aries in the 12th house. And based on your life story and the things that you shared with me, I believe that your wound is addiction. The 12th house, Pisces is the ruler, and the shadow, the darker side of that is addiction. And then maybe how that addiction has afflicted your sense of personal power, which is the Aries part of your Chiron. And we talked a little bit about, how your mother's personality also played into this Aries wound. And you have your Chiron conjunct Venus here. And based on the events of your life, my speculation is that this Venus conjunct Chiron is those experiences of your survival being threatened, getting in those car accidents over and over again. And, you told me that what made you change, what made you give up your addiction was these accidents and fear for your life, fear that you wouldn't survive. And Venus, Taurus is the ruling sign, and Taurus has to do with, you know, a lot of things, our self-worth, our self-value, and I'm sure that, you know, and maybe that could be a component of your addiction too. You know, maybe your addiction has left you with some wounds around your self-worth or your self-value, which it shouldn't, but, you know, we're human and some things we can't help. But Taurus is also about, you know, our very survival. That's the key thing with Taurus. Taurus seeks security on the earth, you know, on the earth plane, on the earth level, because it's an earth sign. So survival of the body, Taurus. And that's your wound, you know, this. And then how this Chiron wound connects to your South Node identity. You know, in Virgo, we feel cut off from connection, and some people, when they feel cut off from connection, they will use drugs and alcohol as a substitute. You know, they will become addicted to some substance as a coping mechanism, because the sense of disconnection, the sense of, you know, what am I here for? This life just seems meaningless. Again, which ties into your North Node energies, you know, with Neptune being the ruler of your North Node, finding out what the true meaning of life is, which is connection to Source, to God, to whatever you call it. Now, with your South Node in Virgo, you could have, and I'm going to say could have, because again, I'd probably have to talk to you for hours and hours to know your full story and everything, but you talked about having many jobs, and maybe with Virgo as your South Node, you try to meet some of your basic needs, some of your different needs, you know, your need for significance, to feel important, to feel useful. You know, you could have met any of your needs through work, which is a very Virgo thing. And then again, this wound pops up, you know, the addiction and how that affected your ability to do what you wanted. You know, it affected your will, because maybe you wanted to work, but you couldn't because of the DUIs or because of the accidents. I don't know what the whole situation was, but this is just me guessing at some things. So as you can, maybe you're starting to see, you know, this wound is really pivotal in helping you make this journey from your South Node to your North Node, because the wound teaches us how to let go, how to surrender. We talked a little bit about Chiron as the bridge between Saturn, the earth plane, and Uranus, you know, this freedom, this reaching up to higher heights, this aspiring towards God, to be like the gods. You know, Aquarius is the water bearer. So in Chiron, we're humbled. You know, we have this wound that we don't want to face. We just, you know, we want to be healthy. We want to be whole. We don't want to have to face our humanity and our mortality. So we keep trying to hold on to the identity that we have, because Chiron's forcing us, you know, it's forcing us to let go of our current identity, and that wound is prompting us to learn about humility, to to learn about surrender, to learn that, there, as a human being, there is no such thing as perfection, and how to be okay with that. And Chiron is connected to the sign of Virgo, and this whole Virgo Pisces axis that's what it's really about. It's about learning, through that self-analysis, through those crises, what's really important in life, and that, Virgo aspires towards perfection, but Pisces is the unconditional love, represented by God, that communicates to Virgo that it's okay. You don't have to be perfect. It's just being you and doing your best job is enough. You are lovable enough, you're good enough, you are whole just as you are. You might have some scars left from this journey. You might have some chironic scars, but that is the journey of man. And to learn to be okay with that, I think, is a beautiful representation of the whole Virgo Pisces axis. Okay, well, I'm going to go through the other themes of this axis and how it relates to your Chiron. Okay, so South Node in Virgo. I already talked a little bit about how the self-analyzation of Virgo, the crisis, life crisis associated with Virgo leads to that self-analyzation, which eventually leads to liberation, which is represented by the opposing energy of Pisces. And in your case, the crisis was the wound, the addiction, and how you saw how unmanageable your life was when you were on substances, and how they just led to crisis after crisis, and that forced you inside, where you had to start really looking at yourself and your life and figuring out, well, what is the true source of all this crisis in my life? Maybe when you were younger, you felt like you were a victim, and it was, oh, it's everybody else, and I'm just a victim of life, and life sucks, and life hates me, and God hates me even. Some people might think that, but with Virgo, there's that eventual self-analyzation, and, really learning how to take responsibility for whatever crises are occurring in your life, and realizing that, for the most part, it's our decisions and actions that lead to crisis. There's some things that happen in our life that can't be avoided, like the loss of a loved one, or, certain illnesses, but a lot of times we have a huge responsibility and a huge part to play in the crisis in our life. And all we can do is, begin to take responsibility for whatever part is ours, and then learn to surrender to whatever part isn't, learning to let go of what we really don't have control of, and learning to take right action and change our behaviors on the things that we do have control of, which is our self, our behaviors, and our life. Okay, another Virgo theme that you mentioned was being of service. And you have Pluto in the sign of Virgo, so that means that you're part of the Pluto and Virgo generation. I don't know the specific dates off the top of my head, and I forgot to look it up, but souls born within, I think it's like between 7 and 12 year time period, they all come in with a specific mission for their specific generation. And with Virgo, it's about service. So you're part of this generation that is here to be of service to others, at this time, during this incarnation. And you also shared, Virgo always wants to be of service. That's one thing that makes them really happy. You talked about in the past feeling like you were in service to and a slave of your addiction, which goes back to this Chiron wound. And now wanting to be of service to God, which is indicative of you learning, most of your life lessons, because you're learning how to grow and evolve into this new person. You have this new sense of who you are, and it's to be of service to God, not to be of service to the addictions and what some people might call the devil. Which I really don't like that term, but I'm not going to go into my personal beliefs on heaven and hell and all that, but and then the last piece with the South Node in Virgo, there can be a lot of criticism. When we're talking about the moon, a lot of times the self-criticism is kept internally, so you won't verbalize this. You won't criticize others. That's more of like a Virgo sun thing, because the criticism is externalized, it's where people can see it. So there might be a lot of, bad self-talk, which again can tie into this Venus and this wound around self-worth with having that Venus conjuncture Chiron. So learning, as you become more connected to God and more tapped into that field of unconditional love, I believe, and I've experienced, that our connection to God begins with ourselves. If we're not, so many people try to look for all their answers to their problems externally. They try to look for a God who's going to save them, a God who's going to love them unconditionally. And then that, they start from the top up. They go from God and then to a partner. I want a partner who's going to love me unconditionally. But my experience of finding connection to Source is that until I learn how to love myself and be connected to myself, which is a bottom-up approach, I use the analogy of a ladder. You want to climb a ladder up to God, you have to start at the bottom rungs, which is you. You have to start loving yourself and, talking good to yourself about yourself, having boundaries, having good self-worth, trusting yourself, learning that you can be trustworthy, that you're going to treat yourself good and expect others to treat you good. So that means that if you can trust yourself, you can start to trust other people, that they're going to treat you good, because you know that you won't let them treat you bad because you trust yourself. You'll start to trust God and the universe, that it has your best intentions in mind. You won't feel like a victim of life anymore, if that's something you ever felt in the past. So for me, that's been the key, is, climbing the ladder, starting on the bottom rung, which is me. I have to take specific actions. I have to learn how to have boundaries. I have to learn how to love myself, which is something my parents never taught me. They never modeled to me. And then, I can keep climbing the ladder. I can get up to where my peers are at, my friends, my partner, my colleagues. I can start to feel connection through them, and then through that up the ladder to source and God. But so many people, they try to start climbing a ladder at the top, and it's impossible, because if you're empty inside and you haven't done the work to fill the hole left by your parents, where that that self-love was supposed to have been nurtured and created, in my experience, I haven't. God has helped me to be able to do that, but again, I never really felt connected to God or anybody until I felt connected to myself first. And that was through my own efforts. There was nobody that was going to save me, and nobody that helped me do that. So, in summary, with this here, this Chiron wound, they say once you've been an addict, that you're always an addict. And you have to keep, doing whatever it is that you do. You have to keep doing your exercise or going to 12-step meetings or whatever you do to stay away from those addictions that harm you. These are the scars. This is a scar. You're always going to have this addiction, and that's your chironic scar from your wound. And to come into full acceptance of the scars and of the consequences associated with your addiction, all the things that have happened in your life because of your addiction, and the toll that it's taken on the different areas of your life, to come into full acceptance and surrender of that's when your life starts to change. And I know that you know this, somebody who's been on this path of being sober for 3 years. I know that you know this. So the key is not, it's not to beat yourself up. It's not to Venus conjunct Chiron. It's not to engage in bad self-talk and have low self-worth and keep doing things that's going to put your physical survival at jeopardy. It's not a fighting against your addiction. It's it's finding, an alternative mode of connecting with source and of finding out the meaning for life that isn't about drugs or alcohol. Because, you shared with me that that's something that had happened in the past. You felt more connected to source or God when you were on substances. And maybe this addiction of yours acted, as a bridge between your ego and God. I'm not here to judge. I've never struggled with addiction, so I don't know the things involved. I do have family members who have struggled with it, so I've seen, the external effects of it. But who am I to say that in the past that your addiction didn't help you on your journey, towards your north node. And I think I already talked about how it did, either this Chiron wound. And then the trauma in your life, we can see through your Uranus placement, which is here, and it's in the sign of Libra. With Uranus in Libra, there can be relationship trauma in the form of codependence or hyperindependence. Codependence being, do you feel like you need to be with somebody to be okay? Like you're going to change who you are as a person and change what you do just so that somebody will stay with you. That's codependence. And then on the flip side, hyperindependence. Maybe you feel like you don't want to open up to anybody. You can always get by on your own. You don't need anybody in life. And, healthy relationships are built on interdependence, where we realize and we acknowledge that yes, we do, as a species, as a human being, we do need others to survive. But we have to understand the right balance between self and others. We can't be a doormat and let other people walk all over us. We can't love others more than ourselves, which was what happens in codependence. And we can't just stay so isolated where we think we can get all of our needs met, by ourselves and for ourselves, and we're cut off from others. There has to be this balance between those two things. And then with your Uranus in the 6th here, some trauma themes could be the inner emptiness and self-criticism. Maybe you shared with me a little bit about your mother's personality and how she was emotionally neglectful, which of course is going to leave any child with this sense of inner emptiness, this inability to connect, to know how to connect with an other, and it starts with the self. If your parents never model empathy and they never model that it's okay to have emotions, then how are you going to learn how to connect to your inner self, to your emotions and your emotional body? And that's the source of this emptiness and this disconnection that we feel. And with Uranus in the 6th house, there could have also been a component of criticism. Your caregiver or givers, I don't know who all was in the picture, but they could have been really critical of you. Nothing was ever done right. Nothing was ever enough. Maybe you were labeled as the black sheep of the family, because it seems to me, from what you shared, that you have more of a reactionary personality. So you take all the pain and you push it out, you externalize it. And, there's one of two types. People can internalize the pain or externalize it, or they can do both. But when kids lash out, with their anger or with their pain, they're often labeled as bad. They're the bad kid, and the ones who hold all the pain inside to try to please the parents, they're the ones that are labeled as the good child. And neither child is good or bad. It's just that the parent is so selfish and so so immature, and so dealing with their own problems, which stem from their own upbringing. So it's just this nasty cycle. But Anyways, in your chart, your Uranus is opposite your Chiron here. Usually planets, if you think of the astrology wheel as a table, just imagine this big conference table. A lot of times it can be hard for planets across from each other to really even know that the other one exists, or to have knowledge of the other one's existence. So with your Uranus opposite your Chiron, your wound, your chironic wound, and your trauma might be blind to each other. You might not be able to see how these two things are related, your trauma and your wound. And then, what's all involved with those two things, which I just talked about. Your Uranus is also square your midheaven here. So any unresolved trauma that you have can cause struggles with your professional or societal image. The midheaven is reputation that we have in the world. It can be linked with our career and our profession. It doesn't always have to be, but that's a struggle for you, obviously, because of the things that you've been through in your Chiron wound. I can see how that can cause some, with that square, that could cause some struggles with, your societal image or professional image, which can be hard because people are so judgmental and they don't understand these things. A lot of people are really afraid to even look at themselves. So when you don't look at yourself, then you can judge other people and say all kind of crazy things. And I'm not going to go on about that, because if I do, I might get started and then this video will be an hour and a half long. You don't want to listen to me rant and rave. And there were a couple more pieces here I wanted to talk about. Okay, the Saturn-Mars conjunction here. So we know Saturn is the taskmaster, the bringer of lessons, the lessons we need to learn in life. And with it conjunct Mars, it could be lessons about your personal power and its usage. We talked about how the healthy versus unhealthy use of power and of a person's will. And again, this connects to your chironic wound with that Mars there, and how your mother's personality was, and how it seems like this is a theme from what you told me with a lot of your family members, with the men being connected to women who are power hungry, and fearful. In EA, Mars is also the more conscious expression of Pluto. So wherever Mars is what we can think that our life is about, and versus, what it really is at the soul level. What's like the unconscious driving desire of our soul? What's really driving our whole chart and our whole life? That's Pluto. But wherever Mars is what we can think it's about. And with Mars conjunct Saturn, you can see how anybody from looking from the outside, and maybe even yourself at one point, thought that your life was just all about Saturn things. It was about hard lessons. It was about the school of hard knocks, having to learn things the hard way and just always feeling oppressed, and just all the things that are connected with Saturn. Okay, and then I think the last thing I wanted to talk about in your chart was your Mars and Venus phase. So you have Mars here and Venus here. And to calculate your Mars-Venus phase, you start with the slowest moving planet and you go to the fastest moving one. And you calculate the distance here, and this tells you about how you're experiencing the relationships in your life, both to yourself and to other people. And your phase is balsamic phase, Venus and Mars. I'm not going to talk about this here. I have a video on it on my YouTube channel. If you haven't watched that, you can. It'll give you a lot more information about the specific Mars-Venus phase and how, what the role of relationships is in your life. What's really going on under the surface with your relationships. What do you feel is the purpose of relationships in your life? And I'll just go ahead and say, with that balsamic Mars and Venus, these are people who view relationships with a sense of unconditional love. Relationship to them is about merging with the Creator through everything, through the people in their life, through it could be something as simple as their pet or the plants that they take care of, but every relationship that they have in their life is going to be very spiritual in nature. I'll just put it that way. Well, which ties in really nice to having a North Node and Pluto polarity point in Pisces, with that being the ultimate evolutionary goal and desire of the soul, that desire to figure out the meaning of life and to merge with that meaning. Okay, now I want to talk about the last thing. I took some notes, and I know that you said you have the book, which is where I got this information, the essays on evolutionary astrology. So if you wanted to go back in there and read about the retrograde planets in the chart and what they mean, I think it's maybe the last chapter in the book. But you have Pluto and Uranus retrograde, as well as Jupiter and Neptune. So you have 4 planets retrograde in your chart. I'm going to go ahead and read the notes that I took on that. So people who have 4 or more retrograde planets, which you do in your chart, have what's called a retrograde personality style. And this is coming from Jeffrey Wolf Green. So again, if this doesn't resonate with you, it's not something to take on. Jeffrey Wolf Green is not the God of your life. He's just given us some amazing tools to help us to be able to navigate, our life and our suffering, which we can be really grateful to him for that, and we should, but it doesn't mean that he's the final authority on our life. But anyways, the retrograde personality style is, typically introverted, extremely shy, sensitive, timid, and socially unsure. And then I took notes on each specific planet that you do have retrograde. So before I get into that, the meaning of retrograde planets in the birth chart is to accelerate the evolutionary momentum of the soul. So anything that you have retrograde in your chart, it's this, this turning inward, this constant self-analyzation, which ties in really nicely with all that Virgo energy that you have. so that you can grow and evolve, at a more accelerated rate. The retrograde planets accelerate the process of individuation. The function of the planets, they have retrograde in your chart, will act differently to the status quo expectation of those planets, which will cause you to feel different from other people in these areas. So with Jupiter in your belief systems, you're going to feel different to how others believe and how they think about belief systems, because you have that retrograde in your chart as an example. So let's go ahead and go into the notes on each specific planet. So Jupiter retrograde says all belief systems and structures from your past lifetimes must be eliminated in order to arrive at an individuated belief system. And I put here natural spirituality. I'm going to go ahead and share a little bit about my life and my chart, just because I feel like it will help to highlight this. So I have Chiron retrograde in my chart, and it is in Virgo, with, that Virgo wound of Chiron. There's a lot of wounding around, at least for me, there's been a lot of wounding around this idea of perfection and this need to be saintly, to be holy, to have to be connected to source, and how in order to be good and saintly and holy, I had to look outside of myself, at different authority figures, spiritual authority figures, different gurus and different spiritual teachers, to find out how to be good, how to be connected to source. And I thought, when I was always thinking that other people had the answers, maybe this guru can tell me how to connect to source. Or maybe this spiritual teacher has the answers for me. Like God was like I was disconnected from God, and I had to go on this long journey to find God, because God wasn't inside of me. I wasn't God. God wasn't a part of me. And through my Chiron retrograde and my wounding around perfection and the need to be good and perfect before I felt like I could be connected to source, eventually I learned that that wasn't true. I learned that all of that was nothing more than the ego and, certain ideas that people, that I'd heard from other people's minds about what true spirituality was. And now I teach about natural spirituality, which is the realization that we are connected at all times and through all things to the Creator. The Creator, God, lives inside of each cell of our body. God is everywhere and is everything. God is omnipresent. God is always present in everything and everywhere in space and time. Now that's my natural spirituality. That's my individuated belief system. And that's something that it took me a long time, and it took a lot of pain, and it took a long journey for me to figure out. I've heard it said that Chiron is part of your life purpose. And I feel like a big part of my life purpose is to bring this message that, you don't have to try to find God Nobody else has the answers. No religion, no teaching has the answers of how to find God, because God lives inside of you. God is. And a big part of my purpose is helping other individuals find their own authority so that they can come to a belief system that feels true, that feels authentic for them, that they can feel deep inside their body and their bones, so that they can stop searching for God with their minds. Anyways, getting back to this Jupiter retrograde. So for those who have it, consequently, developing their intuition is important, which can lead people to feeling inferior in communication because of the right brain symbols or archetypes. And their felt sense are not easy to put into words. I know you mentioned to me that, you have this gift of, you like poetry, you're more in touch with archetypes and symbolism and emotion to navigate your world than you are with your mind and your intellect. And I think that that's connected to this Jupiter retrograde that you have here. Okay, with Uranus retrograde, it says must rebel against non-natural laws or man-made laws. Systems and authority to find reality structures that work for the individual. So a big part of astrology in general, and specifically evolutionary astrology, is you're coming at life and reality more from a place of natural law. What are the natural laws that govern man? One of those being, this law of evolution. Every person has to change. No person can remain the same lifetime after lifetime. Their sense of who they are has to grow and evolve. And I'm not going to get into the belief structures around that, because I feel like I don't want to perpetuate any type of guru mentality, or I have the answers to life and all its great mysteries. I think that can be really distracting when people are trying to find a true connection with source. But these natural laws that govern man, everything must pass away. Energy can never be destroyed. It only changes form and is recycled. These are natural laws versus man-made laws, which a lot of the times are just straight up BS. They're not serving anybody except a few people who want to capitalize on as much as they can out of fear, out of greed, fear, just lots of dark, low vibrational states. So those with your Uranus retrograde, they're more drawn to natural law, to things like astrology, anything that's natural, to find reality structures that work for the individual. They don't work for society, they don't work for governments or corporations, they work for the individual person. Another theme is repeating or reliving certain friendships from other lifetimes where something was not resolved, or simply to connect with old friends again in this lifetime. And I really like that. I like that idea. Another theme, past and present life memories, some of which may be traumatic in nature, as well as thoughts and inspirations that repeat, are important. Okay, repeating ideas, hunches about how to improve. This is stuck. Hold on. Improve one's life need to be acted upon, and repeating traumatic experiences in the form of nightmares, flashbacks, triggers, etc. need to be made sense of and worked through. Okay, so there's two different things in here. One is that any repeating ideas or thoughts or inspirations, these are things that you think, oh, maybe I need to move to this country. And it keeps coming up, the same idea, the same thought over and over again. This is something that needs to be acted upon. This is something that's coming up from the unconscious that is really going to improve your life. And then the other part of that is having access to the subconscious, whether that's from this lifetime or from past lifetimes. These memories that are buried there and how they might come up through nightmares, through flashbacks, through triggers. These are all things that need to be worked through and that are associated with Uranus retrograde. Another thing that can happen is souls that are fundamentally detached from life and even themselves, dissociated from trauma, PTSD. And we know that Aquarius and Uranus are about, detaching from the self, detaching from anything that's concrete and physical, which is represented by the preceding sign of Saturn, in order to carry on towards the sign that comes after, which is Neptune, to begin to loosen the bonds to the material plane, so that the transition to the non-material plane, to death and to the experience that comes after is less painful, and it just makes the transition easier. And sometimes this experience of detachment, if it's on the more shadow side, it can be from trauma, related PTSD, and they can feel dissociated. So that's just things that need to be worked through, which the soul will be doing in this lifetime, because the Uranus retrograde forces the soul to go inside, the ego to go inside itself and start looking at what's happening inside. Neptune retrograde, a consciousness or soul who will progressively reject or rebel against that which constitutes the real meaning of life as defined by temporal, societal, or cultural values. So I like this because it's related to this Jupiter retrograde. With the Jupiter retrograde, you are learning how to eliminate, certain belief systems, religions, any belief system that you've held on to. And once you've done that, then that correlates to having this Neptune retrograde. The next theme, an underlying desire to realize what the ultimate meaning of life is, which can be experienced as an existential void or crisis, which ties in really nicely with that Neptune North Node that you have. The intent of Neptune retrograde is to commit to a spiritual life where the ultimate meaning of life is realized. So, like you said, you want to be of service to God. That's committing to a spiritual life where the ultimate meaning of life, as you are understanding it in this lifetime, is actualized. Some other things that can present with Neptune retrograde is hysteria due to unresolved trauma. So things like split personality, phobias, autism, or savantism, which is some type of genius you know, like this person who's a genius piano player, but in all the in all the other areas of their life, they're more primitive, you know, more childlike. Last theme, past life dreams, messages in dreams, astral travel, and sleep problems. Okay, Pluto retrograde. It says half the population has Pluto retrograde, which acts as a way to keep humanity evolving. Those with Pluto retrograde feel greater dissatisfaction with life, which is connected to Pluto and the competing desires of the ego and the soul, which are, those competing desires are to move away from and towards source simultaneously. You know, the ego wants to move away from source while the soul wants to move towards source. The ego wants to maintain what it currently is and keep separate from source by believing that it's its own separate entity, while the soul wants to destroy that ego lifetime after lifetime, so that eventually the consciousness within the human form begins to understand, you know, that light bulb begins to come on that says, you know, I thought this life was about one thing. I thought that living, you know, the meaning of life was about toys, you know, how much money am I going to have? And what kind of fancy car can I buy? Until the consciousness within the ego that keeps reincarnating eventually learns that, you know, there are such thing as natural laws that govern what we will experience on this earthly plane. And a lot of that has to do with suffering. And do I want to keep having these experiences of separation that keep me suffering? You know, these experiences of disconnection from source that keep me suffering. And these separating desires cause us to feel dissatisfied, of course, because, you know, our ego is so attached to those material things, you know, the new car, the spouse, the fancy clothes, the good food. And when we can't get those things, of course, we're going to feel dissatisfied. And another big lesson, even when we do get those things, you know, a lot of celebrities and really wealthy people, they find out that no matter how much money you have and no matter how many toys you have or however many gorgeous lovers you have, ridiculous, that, you know, it never satisfies you, because what everyone ultimately is looking for is, you know, is connection. It's to come back home to the God within yourself, you know, that God that's within you and is within everyone and everything around you. Okay, I think that is it. I'm looking over the notes I wrote for you real quick. Hopefully this reading was helpful. In summary, I'll do a quick summary of your chart. So in this lifetime and in your most recent lifetimes, your journey, you know, is all these experiences that you've had in your life, all the suffering that you've had to go through. It's about the journey from Virgo to Pisces. It's about learning, you know, just feeling disconnected, feeling not good enough, feeling cut off from God and all the good things of life, and learning how to find that again, you know, lifetime after lifetime, through these chironic lessons, through this trauma. You know, you're learning having these repeated experiences of learning that the sixth house Virgo stuff, yes, it's important. It's important because we are human beings. We can't be whole and deny our humanity. We can't say that the spiritual is more important than earthly things, because that's just fragmentation. That's not integration between our past self and our future self. That's not a whole integrated ego or human being. We have to be able to find balance between the earth plane and the spiritual plane. And to do that, we have to be very, very natural in our approach to ourself and our spirituality. I feel that's what has been the case in my experience anyways. We can get in trouble really fast if we approach spirituality from the ego and from the mind. So I really like that you have this Neptune as well as this Jupiter retrograde, because that's really going to help you to find a way to connect to source, which is your ultimate goal. That is your own, that's unique to you, that's really true for you, that really resonates with you. And it's so simple to do that. And the way to do that is just to gravitate towards people, things, experiences that nourish you and that are healthy for you and make you feel good. Not as coping mechanisms. It's not this, I'm going to use this, let's just say this substance to try to feel connected to God, as a substitute. You want to go after the real deal. You want to go after the highest, you want to go after the most healthy people, experiences, things you can that are going to nourish you and your soul, at that deep level. And then anything that feels bad, any belief system that makes you feel like you're not connected to God, or you're not good enough yet. You have to do all these things to be good and holy and to win connection with God or favor with God. Or a person that makes you feel this way, maybe they make you feel like you're not worth their time. Anything like that, anything that makes you feel bad. That's going to lead you to disconnection from yourself and from others and from the Creator. All right, and that's it for this reading. I wish you the best in life and take care.